Once a giant, always a giant. For me, it's only a giant.
What's going on YouTube? Diggy546. Definitely hit that subscribe button if you're new. Like the video if you like the video. And I won't tell if you click that bell. But let's go ahead and get into this. Alright, so I kind of went back and forth with myself for how I wanted to do this video. At first I was going to give my stat predictions for every position, for every major position. And I just kind of thought about it, and as I was adding things up, there are way too many unknowns about Wan'Dale Robinson, about Sterling Shepard, about Cole Beasley, about all these guys. It's just really too difficult to kind of predict that. And then for all of those numbers to add up to Daniel Jones's total passing yards, Daniel Jones's total completions, it's a lot of math to do, and it's a lot of things that I just can't predict as far as injuries, as far as is Wan'Dale going to start on PUP. Very difficult to figure out. So what I decided to do is come out and just do over-unders. Now, I know Vegas has their over-unders, but these are Diggy's over-unders. I'm going to do over-unders for some of the major players. I'm not going to touch every player on the team. I'm not getting the backups. I'm not getting to some of the guys that I think just won't do much. But it should be fun. I'm going to do the entire defensive line. I'm going to do Bobby Okereke. I'm going to do the entire starting secondary. And I'm going to do most of the major receivers. And, of course, Saquon and Daniel Jones. So, without any further ado, I'm going to get straight to it. Daniel Jones, I put his over-under at 23.5 passing touchdowns, 9.5 interceptions, 3,500 yards passing, 4.5 touchdowns rushing, and 550 yards rushing. So I came to these conclusions because I think you look at Daniel Jones' career, he just had his career year for passing yards, and I think it was like 3,300, 3,200. So 3,500 will be 300 more yards than he's ever thrown for in his career. I think it's doable with this receiving core, and I think it's doable, but I could see him throwing for 4,000. But also, I just set it for 3,500 because, again, we just have not seen him throw for a ton of yards. So that's one thing. 9.5 interceptions. He threw 8 last year, but I think he'll be a lot more aggressive. So I can see him throwing 2 more. I can see him throwing 1 more. I can see him throwing less, but I'm thinking that the aggression is probably going to lead to more interceptions. But hopefully, as I get to the touchdowns, hopefully that leads to more touchdowns. So I set it for 23.5. Again, that'll be half a touchdown less than he's thrown for in his rookie year. But the past years, he's been in the teens. So this is a big jump. Going from 17 touchdowns, or I think 16, going from that to 23.5 is like +6 or +7 touchdowns, which may happen. But I think 23.5 is a generous over-under. I could see him, like I said, throwing for 28, but I could also see him throwing for 21. So that's where I kind of came to with Daniel Jones as far as the passing. Now, looking at his rushing, 4.5 touchdowns I think is doable. I think he'll have some red zone touchdowns. I think he'll have some touchdowns from outside the red zone. So last year he had 7, 4.5. I just set it for less than 7 because I think he'll have more passing touchdowns. So 4.5 I think is a good number. And 550 rushing yards. Again, I think he'll run a little bit less than he did last year. So last year he had over 700. This year, 550. So you guys let me know as I go through this. You guys can just drop down in the comments like, Diggy, that over-under number is way too high or that's way too low. Let me know as I go through this. So Saquon Barkley next up, 1,150 yards rushing, 7.5 touchdowns. I think those are realistic numbers. Now, to get his incentives, he's got to hit 1,300. We got to be in the playoff contention. So that's going to be some incentive for him. But 1,150, again, I think there'll be some more passing yards. 7.5 touchdowns. Again, I think DJ will throw for more, so that might take away some of Saquon's touchdowns. And then 45.5 catches. That's pretty makes sense to me. Could probably be over 50, 60. But I think he'll have more big play kind of catches and less dump offs. I think Eric Gray will get a ton of dump off catches, and I think Saquon will be running a lot of routes out of the slot, out of everywhere. So I set his over under for receiving for 550 yards receiving, and then 4 touchdowns. So I think those are realistic numbers. So that would put him at around just by what I've said is his over under. I put him at like 1,600 total yards, which wouldn't put him at 2,000, but 1,600 total yards, around 10, 11 touchdowns. Solid season for him. Wouldn't get him his all of his guarantees, but would be a solid season and would be him making an impact. So here we go, receivers. And Darren Waller, of course, is there. Bellinger is here. 820 yards, 7 touchdowns, and 83 catches for Darren Waller. Again, these aren't my exact predictions, but these are my neighborhood predictions as far as over-unders, because I did not want to add all these players up to try to make it equal exactly what Daniel Jones would have. So 820 yards, I think, is doable for him. Of course, he's got to stay healthy. He's got multiple 1,000-yard seasons. I think we will target him heavily. 7 touchdowns is about right. He had some seasons where he had 3 touchdowns and 1,000. He had another season where he had 9 touchdowns and 1,000. So that's all possible. 83 catches. That puts you at about 9 point something yards per catch. I think he'll have his short catches, and I think he'll have his long catches. So this all checks out to me. I do think he has an opportunity to go over 1,000, but I will put his over under at 820, 7 touchdowns, 83 catches. Daniel Bellinger, he's your number 2 tight end. We got a ton of receivers. So 460 yards receiving, 3 touchdowns, 40 catches. Now, he could be a guy that has 400 yards and 8 touchdowns, because they're going to be double and triple teaming Darren Waller. They're going to be double and triple teaming Hodgins, because he's going to be a red zone threat. So he could be a guy that gets a bunch of touchdowns in the red zone. But for now, I have him at 460, 3 touchdowns, 40 catches. I think he'll have a lot of those leak out catches, a lot of those catches where DJ is kind of scrambling out. I think Bellinger will have those. Hodgins, same thing. I think his targets will go down just because of how many more weapons there are. I think Darren Waller will take up a lot of the catches that Hodgins may have had. 500 yards, 6 touchdowns, 40 catches. I think he'll be a red zone guy for us. Not because I think he's, a guy that's going to high point passes and everything like that. Not to say he can't, but I think he'll be a guy that just finds those holes in the short area and gets a bunch of touchdowns that way. So Hodgins, 500 yards receiving, 4 touchdowns, 60. No. Wrong one. 500 yards receiving, 6 touchdowns, and 40 catches. Now, I could see those catches being a lot higher, but that's where I'm going to set the over-under for now. Paris Campbell, very similar to Hodgins, 500 yards, 4 touchdowns, 63.5 catches. I think Campbell is going to be your slot guy. I could see him having 70 catches. I could even see him having 80 if there's injuries. But I think this is realistic. I could see him having about 4 touchdowns. I could see him having those 500 yards. Guys, I know these players have the potential to have better seasons statistically than that because of their talent level, but there's so many of these guys all around the same level that it's difficult to see who's going to get these targets. So that's where I decided to put Paris Campbell. Now, next up, Darius Slayton always seems to be the guy that stands out for Daniel Jones. So I set his over-under for 700 yards, 3 touchdowns, 42.5 catches. Now, looking at Darius Slayton in the past, he usually has more than like 3 touchdowns. Maybe he had like 4 last year or 5. But, yeah, 650 yards. I think I had 700. I just said 700. So 700 yards for him. 3 touchdowns and 42 catches. I think that's doable for a guy that I really think is like your 3rd or 4th most talented receiver, but he's just got a ton of speed and he's always open. And speaking of that speed, we're going to go to Jalen Hyatt. Now, Jalen Hyatt is really interesting because when I wrote this out, I was not expecting him to get a ton of burn at the beginning of this season. So if he goes out there and he's like getting 50% of the reps, 60% of the reps off the bat, this could change. But for now, I'm thinking they're still going to work him in slowly. He has not played in the game yet. 42 catches, 500 yards, 5 touchdowns. Now, guys, 42 catches, when you work that out to 500 yards, that's 16 yards per catch. So that means that's going to equal a ton of big plays. So he's only got 500 yards, but 16 yards per catch means that he made a ton of big plays there. So I can easily see that happening for Jalen Hyatt. I could even see him going up to 700 and still having those 42 catches, because he's a guy like Randy Moss that where he can have 4 catches for 140 yards. So that's my thing for Jalen Hyatt. And then Wan'Dale Robinson, huge unknowns. And I didn't do anything for Sterling Shepard, and I didn't do anything for Cole Beasley because I'm not sure they're going to make the roster. I'm not sure which one will, so I just can't predict it now. But Wan'Dale Robinson, 3 touchdowns because I'm not sure how long he'll play, 450 yards, 33 catches. We have no idea what's going on with him, so really conservative numbers right there. All right, so you guys let me know what you think of what I've done so far as the over-unders. We got a lot of players. So the receiving especially could go a lot of different ways. So you guys let me know what you're thinking of those so far. Remember, they're not predictions. They're just over-unders. So they're kind of predictions, but, you know, neighborhood predictions. So next I'm going to do the defensive line. Dexter Lawrence capping it off, 7.5 sacks. That's how many sacks he had last year. So I'm thinking he has a potential to get more than that this year. Hopefully he can hit 10 this year. Hopefully he can hit, 9 or 10. Be that double-digit sack guy from a nose tackle position will be crazy. As far as pressures, it's kind of difficult to predict that at this point. But I'm not going to do tackles either. I'm just going to do sacks for these guys. Leo, I had him at 5.5 sacks. I think he'll have some really important sacks. I think he'll have some really important tackles for loss. And I think, even though I'm not recording it, I think he'll have some really important pressures. But 5.5 sacks for defensive tackle is not bad at all. He's a guy that could, also be in that 7.5 to 8 range too. But we'll kind of stay tuned to see how Leo does this year. But I think he'll be behind Dexter Lawrence as far as sacks goes. Kayvon Thibodeaux, he's a guy that could, be the first guy to get double-digit sacks. For Wink Martindale, I have him at 8.5. So maybe a guy that just hits 10, maybe hits 9. That'll be interesting to find out. Had a lot of big game moments last year. I'm hoping that he does more of that, closes out games this year, just like he did last year, just like Dex did. So we got 4 guys who could be closers for us. And speaking of the 4th, Azeez Ojulari, I have him at 7.5 sacks too. He was averaging a sack a game last year. Carl Banks, a guy who should be looked at as one of the great edge players of all time, definitely in Giants history. Carl Banks said that he expects Azeez Ojulari to have no less than 15 sacks this year if he stays healthy. And I wish I could defer to him, but I don't think he'll have 15. I think it'll be more around 9, 8, somewhere around that. But listen, I wouldn't be surprised if he had 15, because he's a pass rusher. That's what he does. He really rushes the passer at a high level. Next up, looking at Bobby Okereke. Last year he had about 150 tackles. I'm not expecting that this year. I got him at 120 tackles, and I got him at 2.5 interceptions. So I could predict sacks here too, but I'm thinking he'll probably have about 3 sacks, maybe 2 sacks, something like that. So, that's a nice season. 120 tackles, 2 sacks, 2 interceptions. I'll be happy with that season, especially if he covers well, like how he's looked so far this camp. And especially if, these tackles a good amount of them are behind the scrimmage, or a good amount of them are tackles to get off of the field. So that's how I'm feeling about Bobby Okereke. Michael McFadden could be next to him. Darren Beavers could be, but we'll kind of find out what happens as we go. Next up, Adoree Jackson, Tay Banks, McKinney, and Jason Pinnock. So I could throw in a Cordell Flott, or I could throw in maybe the answer is Adoree is in the slot this year, and we do have Trey Hawkins out there, but I'll throw in Cordell Flott too. Adoree Jackson, I have him at 2.5 interceptions. I just don't see a ton of interceptions happening in this Wink defense. There's way too much man coverage. I just don't see it happening. I mean, we have like 6 interceptions last year as a team, or 7 or something ridiculous like that. I think we may have more than that. I think we will have more than that this year, but I just don't see a ton of interceptions happening in this heavy man heavy blitz defense where guys are not sitting back in zone jumping on routes. So 2.5 interceptions for Adoree'. Tay Banks, 1.5 interceptions. So could have 2, could have 1, but I don't expect much there. Xavier McKinney's playing that safety position. I think he'll be able to play a little bit more natural, come up and catch some of these passes. So I have McKinney at 4 interceptions this year. So it could be that could very well be a 4.5, but I think 4 is a safe number. I think he will catch a couple of interceptions. I think he'll probably get a pick 6 this year. Man, I wish I could predict what Trey Hawkins was going to do, but that's something we can't figure out right now. Jason Pinnock, I have him at 2.5 interceptions because if anybody's going to catch interceptions this year for our defense, it's going to be safeties because they're not going to be in man as much one-on-one situations. So they'll be able to read and react and come up and catch some of these interceptions. Cordell Flott, I'll throw in 1.5 for him too, just because Wink's defense, they just don't get a ton of interceptions. So looking at these over-unders, I would say that puts us at probably about 9, 10, 11 interceptions, something like that. So nothing crazy. Still towards the bottom of the league, and that's kind of what I'm expecting. We got to force a bunch of fumbles. So that's going to cap off my stat predictions. I do plan to do a live stream. Hopefully I'll bring on a couple of other Giants YouTubers to kind of go over some of these over-unders and also dive deeper, dive into some of the backups like Matt Breida or Eric Gray. So I do plan to do a deeper dive on live stream where there's more time to kind of go back and forth and think about things. But these are my over-unders for these players. I think probably about 20 players maybe I touched on, 15 players. But you guys let me know what you're thinking of these numbers. Do you think they were too high? Do you think they were too low? Let me know that in the comments what you're expecting this year. If you made it this deep into the video, come on, just hit the subscribe button. I make Giants content primarily, draft content secondarily, and during the season, I'm going to be doing a lot of reacting to pretty much most of the NFL games and everything NFL. So if you made it this deep, go ahead and join the D6 squad.